r/NoSleep. I started a new job as a night watchman at Shipwreck Ghost Town, and the previous guard gave me a list of rules I couldn't ignore. Hello, my name is Adam. I recently graduated with a degree in archaeology, and while I wait for something in my field to come through, I picked up a job as a night watchman at a place called Shipwreck Ghost Town. It's an old abandoned settlement near the coast, well known for its eerie history and the wreckage of ships scattered along the shore. The ad I found in the local paper promised $20 an hour for a 10-hour shift, and at this point in my life, I was willing to take anything that would pay the bills. I called the number listed and spoke with a woman who gave me minimal details. The job was simple, she said. I just need to watch over the place for the night. She mentioned that the previous guard would be there to meet me and go over a few things. When she said it was remote, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was just an isolated spot out by the coast. Little did I know, it was going to be much more than that. The drive took about 45 minutes from my apartment. The town itself was located at the end of a long, bumpy dirt road, bordered by thick woods on one side and jagged cliffs on the other. As I got closer, the silhouette of the ghost town loomed through the thick fog rolling off the sea. I saw the rusted remnants of old buildings and broken windows as I pulled into the makeshift parking area. The place felt desolate, like time had completely forgotten about it. I parked my car and got out. The air was damp and cold, the kind of chill that cuts straight to the bone. There was no one around, no signs of life. Only the sound of the wind whistling through the cracked windows of the ghost town buildings. It felt like the entire place was holding its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. The previous guard, a grizzled man in his mid-50s, was sitting on the front porch of a collapsed building when I walked up. He looked up at me as I approached, his face pale, tired, and hollow. His clothes were worn, and there was a noticeable tremor in his hands as he stood up to greet me. "Ah, you must be Adam," he said, his voice low and raspy. "The new guy. Welcome." "Yeah, I'm here for my shift," I replied, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. Something about the way he spoke unsettled me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. "Look, I'm just finishing up," he said. "Before I leave, I need to give you the list of rules. Trust me, you'll want to follow them." At this, I started to feel a little more uncomfortable. "Rules?" I asked, confused. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket and handed it to me. I noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he passed it over. I took it, not sure if I should say anything, and unfolded the paper. There were 10 rules written in neat handwriting, but the words made my stomach twist. 1. Never, under any circumstances, go near the shore after midnight. If you hear voices calling you, ignore them. 2. If the fog starts to roll in, stay inside and lock all doors and windows. Don't leave the building until the fog lifts. 3. If you hear knocking on the walls, don't investigate. Hide and don't make a sound. 4. Do not turn on any lights outside. If you see lights in the distance, don't approach them. 5. If you see any figures in the windows of the abandoned buildings, don't acknowledge them. Look away and stay focused on your post. 6. If you hear a bell ringing, it's not real. Do not respond to it. 7. If someone knocks on the door, do not open it, even if they claim to need help. 8. If the clock strikes 2 a.m., do not look at the clock. The time will freeze if you do. 9. If a ship appears on the horizon, do not approach it. It will vanish before your eyes. 10. If you see someone standing by the old well in the middle of town, don't approach them. They will never leave. I looked up from the paper, heart racing. The man was staring at me, his expression intense. "Just follow these, alright?" he said, his voice barely a whisper now. "And whatever you do, don't go off the beaten path. Not even a step. Not a single step." He paused, his eyes wide with fear. "It's not safe out here at night." Okay, I muttered, trying to mask my growing discomfort. "I'll follow the rules." The man nodded slowly. "Good. I'll see you in the morning." Without another word, he walked off into the fog, disappearing as quickly as he had arrived. I went inside the small guard station, a shack that seemed like it had been there for decades. The air inside was musty, and the only light came from a flickering bulb overhead. I sat down at the desk, the rules still in my hands, and tried to process what had just happened. My head was spinning, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong with this place. I heard the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks. The fog had started to creep in, thick and impenetrable. The only thing I could see was the outline of the building I was in, the rest of the town swallowed by the fog. As I tried to calm my nerves, a sudden banging noise came from the walls. I froze, remembering the rule about knocking. My heart hammered in my chest as I quickly crouched under the desk, trying to stay silent. The knocking continued, loud and insistent, but I didn't dare move. The fog outside had thickened, and the temperature had dropped. I felt my breath catch in my throat as a faint bell began to ring in the distance, its eerie sound echoing through the fog. I gripped the chair tightly, recalling the rule: if you hear a bell ringing, it's not real. Do not respond to it. I closed my eyes, focusing on my breathing, trying to block out the sounds. Hours passed in silence after that, but every so often I would hear strange noises, whispers, footsteps in the distance, and the unmistakable sound of something heavy dragging across the ground. The list of rules loomed in my mind, each one more disturbing than the last. As the night wore on, I kept my eyes glued to the windows, constantly looking out for any movement, any sign of something abnormal. But the town remained still, the fog thick and impenetrable. When the sun finally began to rise, the fog lifted, and the town appeared just as empty and desolate as it had been when I arrived. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The previous guard returned shortly after, just as the first light of dawn broke through the mist. He looked at me with a knowing glance. "Survived the night, huh?" he asked, his tone a little lighter now. "Yeah. I followed the rules," I replied, feeling my nerves settle slightly. "Good. You'll get used to it," he said, his voice quieter now. "Just remember, always follow the rules. Trust me, it's for your own good." I didn't ask any more questions as he left, but I knew one thing for sure: this job was more than just a night watchman's shift. It was a test of survival, and Shipwreck Ghost Town was not a place to take lightly. The following night, I returned for my second shift, determined to stick to the rules, though I was still haunted by the strange events of my first night. As I drove along the bumpy road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching me from the woods. The silhouette of the ghost town loomed ahead, more intimidating now that I had experienced its eerie atmosphere firsthand. My heart began to race, but I steadied myself. I had a job to do. When I arrived, the fog was already beginning to roll in. The town felt even more desolate in the mist, as if it was a place suspended in time. I parked my car and, as instructed, I immediately locked the doors and windows of the guard station before heading inside. The walls creaked and groaned as the wind howled outside. The single flickering light above my desk cast long shadows across the room. It was as though the building itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with the heavy atmosphere surrounding it. I sat down at the desk, the list of rules still fresh in my mind. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 8:30 p.m. The first few hours passed uneventfully, with only the sound of waves crashing against the rocks in the distance to break the silence. I focused on keeping my mind occupied, flicking through old magazines and checking the monitors in the station. But it didn't take long for the unsettling noises to start again. This time, the knocking was louder, more persistent. It came from the walls, the floors, even the ceiling. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I glanced around, trying to find the source of the noise. But there was nothing. I remembered the rule: do not investigate. Hide and don't make a sound. I slid under the desk again, my breath coming in shallow gasps as the knocking grew louder. My heart pounded in my chest. What could possibly be making that noise? The knocking echoed in all directions, reverberating through the building. It was relentless, as if something, or someone, was trying to break through. I clutched the edge of the desk, my mind racing. The bell rang. It was faint at first, just a distant chime. Then it grew louder, louder still, as though it was being carried on the wind. My eyes widened. "It's not real," I reminded myself. "Do not respond to it." But the ringing grew louder, more insistent. The sound reverberated through my skull, an almost maddening noise. I squeezed my eyes shut, blocking out the bell's eerie tolls, willing the sound to stop. And then, it did. The quiet that followed felt unnatural. For several minutes, there was no sound at all. No knocking. No bell. Just the oppressive silence of the fog-shrouded town. I slowly crawled out from under the desk, my legs trembling. The only noise left was the soft whistling of the wind through the cracked windows. I forced myself to sit back at the desk, but my mind was racing. The rules kept running through my head, and for a moment, I wondered if I was losing my mind. I wasn't sure how much more of this I could take. The fear was gnawing at me, relentless and suffocating. I tried to focus on the tasks at hand, hoping to calm my nerves. But the air was heavy, charged with something unexplainable. It felt like I wasn't alone. Around midnight, the fog grew thicker. The distant sound of waves crashing against the shore was swallowed by the mist, and I could no longer see the edge of the town through the window. The entire world outside was hidden, obscured by an impenetrable wall of fog. I felt my pulse quicken as a cold draft swept through the room, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I checked the clock, 12:15 a.m. The faintest whisper caught my attention, followed by a soft voice calling my name. My breath caught in my throat as I stood frozen, my eyes darting around the room. It sounded like a woman's voice, faint and distant, as if calling from across the sea. "Adam, come closer." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. The rule, I thought frantically, never, under any circumstances, go near the shore after midnight. If you hear voices calling you, ignore them. I stood motionless, my entire body stiff with terror. The voice came again, this time louder. It was almost seductive, coaxing me, pulling me toward the door. "Adam, it's safe out here. Come to the shore." My legs trembled, and I felt an overwhelming urge to open the door, to step out into the fog and follow the voice. I had to fight every instinct in my body to stay inside. I thought of the man who had given me the rules. I thought of his fear, the trembling in his hands, and the warning he'd given me to never leave the path. The voice persisted, insistent and alluring. My hand hovered over the door handle, but I could hear the man's voice in my head, "It's not safe out here at night. Not a single step off the path." I stepped back from the door, heart pounding in my chest, and took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. The voice faded as if it had never been there. Minutes passed, but the unease lingered. I glanced out the window again, eyes scanning the fog. In the distance, I saw a faint light, just a glimmer, shining through the mist. My first instinct was to investigate, but I stopped myself. The rules echoed in my mind: do not turn on any lights outside. If you see lights in the distance, don't approach them. I forced myself to look away. The light flickered for a moment and then vanished, just as quickly as it had appeared. I exhaled, trying to steady my breath, but my heart was still racing. As the night wore on, the rules became my lifeline, a fragile thread holding me together. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow outside the window became a test of my will. I stayed inside, doing my best to follow the rules, even as fear clawed at my mind. Finally, as dawn approached, the fog began to lift. The sun's first rays pierced the mist, and the ghost town slowly began to take shape again, revealing the crumbling remains of what had once been a thriving settlement. My eyes scanned the ruins, feeling an almost palpable sense of relief. The town was just as empty and desolate as when I had arrived. I was still here. I had survived. When the previous guard returned, his face was as grim as ever. "Made it through the night?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "I followed the rules." He gave a slow nod, his tired eyes reflecting something more than simple exhaustion. "Good. Just remember, they're not just rules. They're warnings. This place, it's cursed. And there are things here that are older than the town itself. Don't let your guard down, Adam. Ever." I nodded, understanding now what he meant. Shipwreck Ghost Town was no ordinary place. It was a place where the past had left its mark, and where the dead still roamed. I would never forget the rules, because breaking them wasn't just dangerous, it was the difference between surviving the night and becoming part of the town's cursed history. The next night, I went back to the guard station, ready for whatever the fog might bring. The rules had saved me once. And I knew they would again.